Hello, on today's video I will be showing you this mobile phone that I have repaired and taken out of storage some days ago. It's a Samsung Galaxy A7 2017, quite a good model, I would say. And I will present to you what are my opinions on the product. I have been using a similar mobile phone for quite a while. Actually the same model, but I also have some good opinions and some bad opinions about it along the years. First of all, this model was more or less a mid-range one. It has almost 6 inches screen, but think about it, this was before the phones were having a very tall screen, so you can consider that most of the let's say space you have on the screen is actually much larger than on more modern phones. It was not very far from Samsung Galaxy Note line. On the other side, as told, there are some differences in terms of hardware capability, and I think there are some shortcomings compared with the previous flagship Samsung Galaxy S lineup. The A was somewhere in between the S and the G line. The J line was, let's say, lower mid-range. The A was considered almost, let's say, upper mid-range, and probably the S line was the top range with, let's say, the obvious Galaxy Note presence as the high-end solution. All right. First of all, the phone has a screen that is almost 6 inches in size. I will present the exact specifications on the video's description, so you don't have to mind about that. The resolution is 1920 by 1080, so it's full HD, and this was quite a good specification for a phone in this released around that timeline. It wasn't a cheap model, it was obviously more expensive than the J line, the J7 line that was just a bit smaller than this. It has a bit above 5 inches screen, and this one was obviously larger but had the same resolution as the other phone. All right. In terms of specifications, you don't have to think about let's say an overly advanced capability. It's unfortunately Samsung has not been manufacturing top of the line system on a cheap solutions. They mostly focused on integrating technology, and this meant that compared with Qualcomm Snapdragon's offers, Samsung ones were generally not as high performance as those. However, the performance difference is not as large as you may consider, so I still think that most of the time it was acceptable. The CPU on this system on a chip solution is an 8-core solution that, as far as I remember, has 4 large cores and 4 small cores. The high performance cores can run, as is obvious in this benchmarking program that I'm also going to run. It can run from 450 megahertz to around 1.9 gigahertz. So quite a large range between 449 to 1870 megahertz. It's quite a wide performance potential. However, I think there are some shortcomings, and they are going to be obvious mostly in terms of graphics. And this is not the only issue I have. Another issue from my point of view was that the A line of phones and the J lines did not have enough differentiation in terms of camera. The phone's camera, the sensor actually, I think was almost identical to the J line. And unfortunately, another issue I have noticed with Samsung phones is the fact that there is a lot of contrast enhancements being applied. So when you're going to take a picture, you're going to see, if you're very careful, some white, let's say, contours around the more detailed part of the scene. And I still think that this is unfortunate. I do not have any other major gripes about how Samsung handles the software being installed on the system. Although I don't like it, I still do not see it as a problem. On the other hand, the way in which the camera takes pictures and the processing being done in the phone, still from my point of view, has not improved as much as I would expect. Even phones that were quite let's say more advanced, like the Samsung Galaxy S9, S10 phones, and even S11, I think still have some issues pertaining to this contrast enhancement that is being applied. It's not applied only by Samsung. Other manufacturers such as Huawei apply some sort of quality enhancements in terms of making colors more vibrant and increasing contrast. But I still think that we should be leaving those things aside. If someone wants to improve the photos by editing them later, I think they should have that option. But the image should be reasonably accurate when it's being captured on the phone. Alright, so the applications being installed are quite, let's say, bland. There is the standard lineup of applications that you can find just about on any Google phone. However, there are some changes in terms of the graphical interface that have been traditionally being applied by Samsung, but I think it's reasonably acceptable. All right, so let's look again at the performance test. The amount of memory, I think I'm having some issues with it, because having 3 gigabytes of RAM in a mobile phone, I still think is not quite the optimal amount. Even back then, phones that were on the mid-range, so the J line, had around 3 gigabytes of memory, the same amount of memory. And I think that 4 gigabytes would have been a much more reasonable amount, keeping into consideration requirements of applications and, of course, the general flexibility of a phone that has more memory than it actually needs. As you can see right now, as soon as Android 8 is started, we are left with less than half the memory available, and 1.4 gigabytes is not very much. You have to think about it. I think that the most important drag on memory is still due to browsers and heavy applications such as, I don't know, Google Earth or some sort of game. And in general, having less than 2 gigabytes available right when the operating system is being started, I think it's a letdown. But anyway, this is how things were done. Even right now, there are some phones that are having just the bare minimum amount of memory they should have. So 4 gigabytes at the least is still not a standard that is going to be seriously followed by most manufacturers, especially for lower mid-range products. So I think that we still have some gripes about the configuration. The storage one, this is a bit of a hit and miss. I think that the phone has around 42 gigabytes of storage, or 24, I'm not entirely sure. The usable amount, probably it's around 42, and the usable amount is only less than or around 20 gigabytes. As you see, 21 gigabytes in this case. As soon as you're going to install some applications, you're going to notice that the the amount of storage being available is going to slowly diminish. On the other side, with a phone that was of that vintage, I think that around 24 gigabytes available right off the bat was not a bad decision. I have seen issues with phones that have 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, because there are some updates that you could not be seriously attempting when you already start to place some files on the phones, and especially pictures. This is perhaps another gripe I have with Samsung phones, the fact that you cannot empty or set any sort of limits on the amount of storage space that is being taken by photos, thumbnails. Because if you have a lot of photos, even if you store them on the SD card, there are still quite a large file that is being created, and that one may balloon to more than 2 or 3 gigabytes in size, just because the thumbnails are going to be stored on the phone main storage, and you have no way of moving that. And as far as I can tell, even in modern Samsung phones, this is still an issue. However, to the fact that we have at least 64 gigabytes of storage on most mobile phones, this is much less visible. However, the situation is still present, and I don't quite enjoy it. Other than that, yes, the typical amount of storage being used with applications and with other, let's say, files you may be attempting to have on the phone is not going to be a major issue. You can place, as far as I can tell, more than a 256 gigabyte micro SD card on the phone, so probably 512 gigabytes is potentially working. I have not attempted, but I can clearly say that 256 gigabytes is entirely working with no issue. Alright, so let's run this benchmark, and then I will tell you some other things along the way, as far as I can notice. Alright, so let's run the benchmark. There are going to be some interesting information that are going to be visible along the way, including the performance of the memory. And I will make a comparison not with a top-of-the-line model, but something that is, let's say, in the upper mid-range. I think that it's an A52s model that has been available since 2021, so last year released, and I will make some comparisons based on the performance. The test is still going to run. There are some intermediate results that are going to be visible: integer math, floating point math, prime numbers, random string. I'm not entirely interested in those. They are good values. I'm going to compare them with more modern processors or systems on the chip. However, I think that the graphics performance is going to be very telling, along with the memory one, because in general, memory and graphics are the components, or at least the situations that really make a large impact on performance. And graphics performance, accelerated graphics performance, I think, is still one of the aspects that is quite keeping a phone from having a very good capability. Of course, processor performance is important, but on the other hand, because we have so many situations when we have to use high graphics processing capabilities, in games, for instance, and also in quite complex applications such as Google Earth, I still think, and I'm not even considering virtual reality or augmented reality situations, there are many situations where we have to find a very good graphics performance, and I still think that this is an area that could present a lot of improvement. As you can see over here, there are some interesting details about memory latency, memory read and write performance. So I think you can have quite a good grasp of what this phone is capable of. I'm not expecting this phone to be at all competitive with modern mobile phones. At most, I'm expecting it to be slightly better than a lower mid-range model you may find today. But I think the most important aspect is that it has an OLED screen, and having an OLED screen, considering that most phones still do not have this feature, I think that it is a very important plus of such a phone. Also, another one is the fact that it's a full HD screen. There are some low-end models that still do not have a full HD screen. And also the fact that it's the largest screen you can probably reasonably find without looking for particular models that were quite rare. I think it has a major advantage. Along these animations and graphics tests, you're going to notice that the phone is not quite fast, and particularly in situations where you see a lot of movement, you notice that the frame rate lowers and drops quite severely in some cases. So I think this is the most likely situation when you're going to notice the fact that it's still an old phone, and some challenges may be a bit too much. I don't think that if you're going to browse the internet and watch some movies, you're going to notice any sort of slowdowns. It may not have the fastest wireless standards available, so I don't think you're going to be able to use it as heavily as you could a more modern mobile phone. However, I think it's still going to stand quite well. These kind of animations really show that there are major limitations, especially when you have very high expectations. But on the other side, I don't think they are that common. I don't think that someone buying such a large phone today, second-hand or as new old stock, would be so much concerned with having a very good performance in games. I think that you would like to see videos, perhaps do some office activity from time to time, browse the internet. So I'm not expecting this to be highly important. However, the screen is very important for watching videos or checking photos and doing other tasks that require quite large screen. This, however, I have to say that this phone may not fit certain pockets. This was and still is an issue with models that are quite wide. Right, what else can we say about it? As you can see, the performance, especially when running quite harder tasks, is not going to be very good. So you can see over here 24 frames per second, 40 frames per second, 7.8. I'm pretty sure that a modern mobile phone that is upper mid-range like this one was back in 2017 would have at least double the performance. But I'm going to check and tell you in a bit if you can wait a while. So let me see. Alright, so I'm going to compare with another phone I have available and have been using for some time, the Galaxy A52s 5G. In those graphics tests, as far as I can tell, the performance is, yes, it's double. In the first test, compared with the performance over here, that it's around 25 frames per second, you can reach 52 or 53 frames per second. This one, 40 frames per second or 49 frames per second. On the more modern A52s, it's 60 frames per second. It's not quite double, but there is a large increase. And the OpenGL AS, I was expecting a good performance over here, but it's massive. There is a massive difference from 8 frames per second to 47 frames per second. That is a very large difference, and probably one of the reasons for which more modern mobile phones are faring much better in demanding application, because OpenGL applications are probably pertaining to games and quite strong graphics processing applications. So I'm expecting this to have a major impact on how fast you can fill the mobile phone. Right, if I'm looking at the image filter, 23.4 filters per second, 47.3 for the A52s, so almost double. The image rendering capabilities is even stronger, 958 compared with 5262. So this is a massive difference. I'm expecting more modern mobile phones to have much better graphics handling capabilities, and it's quite obvious from this test. Overall, if I'm looking at the 2D graphics test, the performance over here is 8600, almost 800, 700. If we are going to round, and with a modern phone, it's 26,000. So I'm expecting at least twice the performance you would have on such a model. And even if the score probably is not as accurate of an indication, I think that it's going to show quite a good result. So 9,000 or around 9,000, sorry for running the benchmark again on this side, compared with I think, let me see, 70,000. Yes, so a performance that is at least double. So yes, the 2D graphics tests are going to be showing a very good difference. The 3D graphics test, again, somewhere around twice the score, 10,000 compared with 27,000. Yes, that is massive again. However, there are some differences that are not going to be as obvious. For instance, I think that the disk test is not going to be as severe, or perhaps the RAM. We are going to see immediately which is which. The disk test. The disk test was almost unchanged. It was 90,000, around 20,000. And with the more modern mobile phone is 21,000. So a difference of only 2,000, that is not going to be quite major in this case. So for instance, the internal storage performance, I don't know why, was even slightly lower than in this circumstance. So 191 megabytes per second, 149. It could be due to the way in which storage is being implemented, because with solid state storage, there are sometimes situations when if you don't have a paired chip, and writing and reading doesn't happen concurrently on two, let's say, channels, as the storage controller is being devised, you're not going to have the maximum performance. On the other hand, with writes, yes, probably the difference could be smaller. We are going to see immediately. So 191, it was 149 on the more modern phone. I don't know exactly why. However, the writes are showing quite a bit of a difference. So it's 78 megabytes per second and 100 megabytes on the more modern one, although it's not quite as strong as you would expect. 191 external storage, and 147 on the other one. It's interesting because external storage in this case doesn't mean an SD card, because there is none present. I don't know exactly how this test is being handled. Probably it's the same result as with the internal one, because probably it tests on another partition. I cannot tell you for sure, but this might be the case. Alright, so with this test, yes, we can notice that the performance is not as large. I'm saying that 191 megabytes per second is quite low, or 200 megabytes per second. And even on a mobile phone, I'm thinking that this might be an issue. Not right now, but down the line, because I think that there are applications that could be bogged down by the fact that the storage is quite slow. And think about another aspect. The storage performance is only going to depreciate from the point you are seeing the phone as new, never used. Because the more writes are going to be handled by the controller, the performance is going to slightly degrade, because the storage is also degrading, as not as many cells are going to be able to be written as freely as before. So taking into account where, I still think that the result over here is decent, but the one on the more modern mobile phone is not in the list. So I'm not sure what happens over here, but clearly the performance is not significantly better in this circumstance. And I think that for more serious processing circumstances, this is seriously an issue with mobile phones and tablets in particular, because low storage performance is going to hinder the capability of the device on taking more serious applications. Think about it. Even a computer that was sold almost 10 years ago had a much better performance in some cases than these values. And we are not talking about a top-of-the-line model, I'm thinking about a mid-range model. So clearly the storage is still an issue with mobile phones, tablets, and just about any sort of device that still uses this deep integration. Alright, regarding the memory test. The memory tests, I think, are showing quite a difference. The result, let me see. Yes, the result was almost 3 and yes, 3.5 times higher, roughly something like this. It was 6,800, 6,900 around, and it was 21,000 on the newer model. I was expecting this because memory is very tightly connected and developed along with the processor. So in this case, you have very little incentive in order to bog down your system by using an obsolete device. On the other side, with storage, you can still get by with obsolete solutions. So I was expecting memory performance to be good, but it's a massive difference. So if you think about the throughput, because I think this one is what matters the most in as a guideline for performance, memory read cached 730 megabytes. Memory read cached 2,300. So the performance over here is almost 3 times as large. And I think this is going to make a massive impact on most applications, because memory access is going to be highly important. And especially for a system that, for instance, as in the case of the A52s, has at least 6 gigabytes of RAM. So in that case, you're going to feel the massive difference. However, you're also going to feel the difference of having storage that is not as high performance as the memory subsystem. So yes, that is unfortunate. The CPU test, I think this one will show the biggest difference. So let me look upon the results. It's 2,200, almost 2,300 rounded. And on the other mobile phone, on the 852s, it was 5,800. So a massive increase. And I think that there are some results that show very good improvements. There may be others that don't. Okay, let's look at the first one. Integer math, 22,000 million of operations per second. For the other phone, for the 852s, it's just slightly improved. I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. I was expecting a true jump, almost twice the performance, but it's not the case. So integral performance has not been improving as much. However, I think the floating point math performance is very important, because in general, in physics applications and in most games and just about any application that uses 3D graphics, you're going to need a good floating point performance. So the integral performance is only slightly improved. I think it's a major disappointment. On the other hand, the floating point performance that stands at 3,700 almost millions of operations per second in here stands at 11,800. So over here the performance is almost 4 times as large. So this is a major area of improvement. The floating point performance in neural processors is seriously high. If we are looking at the other results about the prime numbers, 11 million, 7 million, not a very large difference. Data encryption could be showing quite a large difference, but it's not. I was expecting that having, let's say, encryption capabilities better handled in modern system on a chips was given, but it seems not. 2,900 compared with 3,700 is not a large difference. Physics. Data compression. Data compression, yes, it's almost doubled. Over here we have a large difference. 77 megabytes compared with 40 megabytes per second. Physics, 128 frames per second, and we have twice the performance, 246. This was more or less expected, but I think that physics heavily relies on the floating point math, so I think that most of the performance is going to be improved by the floating point capability. Extending instructions. Over here we have a massive difference from 537 millions to 2,592. Yes, it's massive. Over here I think it's the biggest improvement. It's almost 5 times as large performance for extended instructions, and it shows that most of the focus of manufacturers have been towards improving capabilities in other areas than just the integer performance, partly floating point, but massively on extending the instruction set. This was also mirroring the evolution that happened on computers many decades ago, when special mathematics handling instructions, the MMX, the streaming extensions, and so many others that were being applied as time moved on, improved on making large processing on vast data sets. And I think that this goes on to show that phones are also following the same performance range. However, I should mention something about the CPU as well. The CPU of the A52s is a Qualcomm Snapdragon. It's not the top of the line model, it's 7,325. There the F850 I think was a better design, but however it doesn't matter. The fact is that there is still some gap, and probably in this test we still see some difference in the way in which the processing power is being exerted, but I'm still quite sure that the Samsung Exynos recent models are having a performance that is not that far off the Qualcomm Snapdragon chips. Alright, so I think this one covered most of the benchmarks I wanted to show to you. Other than that, the phone. The performance is quite alright. You're not going to see slowdowns in applications. In general, I don't think there are going to be major issues with the phone. If you're making any sort of attempt at let's say taking a picture, okay, cancel, I don't want location tags, you can see this sort of not only graininess but posterization that is quite typical of Samsung phones. Even more modern phones still have the same issues, probably is due to the sensor that cannot have quite a good performance, and still it's not it's far from let's say true professional cameras. But I still think that this is the most important aspect, the fact that the color palette is quite limited, and you can see it just about everywhere that there are many shortcomings. Keep in mind, this is not quite a well-lit area, but even in well-lit areas you're still going to see the same issues. They are not going to be as noticeable as before. So I think that this is an issue. I'm going to right now make an attempt at taking a photo because I want to show to you the issue with contrast. No, I don't want that. Well, if you're going to look over here, you're going to notice that there is a bit of an emphasis on certain contours, and still this is going to happen even on quite new mobile phones. Perhaps an outside picture would be even better because you would notice the effect much more seriously. On the other hand, even over here you're going to notice it. So I think that, yes, I want to delete this picture. Alright, the rest of the applications. Yes, you have the phone application. Yes, I'm not going to present these ones because they look typical. You look at any Samsung model and more or less you have the same picture, the same capabilities, the same look. However, with more modern phones, you have the one we, let's say, skin that is being applied, and that makes many applications different, and even the way in which the operating system works is different. One of the major gripes I have with Android 8 and newer versions on the Samsung is that still there are some aspects that are not going to be handled well in the let's say applications, especially the task switcher. Think about it. There are some cases when you would like to use the feature that Google implemented some years ago in order to have a very simple copy and paste system that you would avoid entering the applications you want just to have a short screen capture that is part of the application, or to take some text from 2 or 3 applications, and one of them has to be switched back and forth. This one would be very easily handled in the task switcher. However, more modern mobile phones, even if they are supplied with Android 12, still do not have the copy-paste capability that Google implemented, I think, since around Android 9 or 10. So this is still a disappointment. Other than that, yes, it's quite a stylish phone. I do not have major gripes. It supports Bluetooth, so you're not going to see any problems with this. If you're looking at the space available, you're going to notice that it's quite alright. Especially in the memory, we are still running at around half the memory. I have not started the browser, but think about it, you're already seeing more than half the memory being taken. And some applications, if you install them, are already going to take memory whether you run them or not. So this is why I said that 3 gigabytes is quite a bad decision, bad design decision. And this was clearly back then, and it's quite obvious even right now. Alright, what else can I show to you? Yes, I could be attempting to run an application. Okay, let me see if I can connect to the internet and show you a sample page just to see how fast it loads. Though this is not going to be relevant because your internet is actually going to make a much bigger difference. And this is the keyboard that you are going to see quite a while. I don't like the Samsung keyboard because I think it takes too much of the screen. You can reduce slightly the amount of space that it takes. You can take out this toolbar that is being presented on the top, yet it's still not as pleasant as I would think. In some cases you would like to have the keyboard that would take very little space, and this customization may be helpful. However, there are various keyboards that you can install through the internet, various apps that offer the same functionality, and I think they are quite good in this case. The Samsung one is not bad. I think it's the most responsive one out of the other keyboards being presented, and especially if you don't need to have all those touch typing capabilities, I think they are going to be running just fine with the standard keyboard. Alright, so we have been making an attempt at opening this. Okay, it's quite fine. You can use with certain browsers the dark or the light skin. So sometimes it may be much more helpful or present. On the other side, I think it looks entirely fine even without those additional, let's say, customization possibilities. Again, as I said, it's quite a good phone. Don't expect anything more than 4 G connection capabilities, but I think it handles them quite well, even this way. And I think it has at most a Wi-Fi 5 performance. It's far from being the most, let's say, high performance networking solution, but it was entirely good back when the phone was released. So I have no complaints about that. The battery life may not be very high. I think you can get by with daily usage if you're not going to stress the phone too much. But since it's an OLED screen, you have to always take into consideration that the phone has to be running at low brightness most of the time, because if you're going to attempt higher brightness, you're going to use the battery much more than you should. If you have a bright environment, you don't have anything to do. That's the current situation. Alright, so I think I have shown to you most of what I was considering. Ultimately, it's a phone that I still find it as being quite good, especially if you find it at a good price and wasn't ever used. If it was used, then probably you have to judge by yourself if it's a good purchase or not. But I still think that the most important aspect is the fact that it has a full HD OLED screen, and this is still a very major strong point for choosing this phone, and also the fact that it's the widest you can find without thinking about specialty devices and without getting into the high-end solutions like the Galaxy Note was and other phones that were similarly created by other manufacturers. So I think that it has many advantages. Unfortunately, the performance may not be up to the current standards, and moreover, I think that there are some software, let's say, issues that detract from fully enjoying it. Other than that, yes, it moves perfectly. The phone was released with Android 7 and now it's being upgraded to Android 8. I think it's quite alright as an operating system. It doesn't take much more memory than Android 7, and even if optimizations could have probably been done slightly better, I have no complaints about it. So if you're not, let's say, seriously planning on games or other demanding applications, and you just want to enjoy a large OLED screen on a phone, and actually full 16 by 9 classical screen, I think that this phone has a lot of merit to it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, the benchmarks, and all the details that have been provided. If you want to search for such a model, I think it's very good, especially if you find it at a good price. What is a good price depends on condition. I am not expecting a stellar performance, but really anything that is let's say more than $200 is totally out of question for such an old model. I don't think it's that valuable. Probably around $100, $150, I think it would be the best, or around 120 euros. I think that it would be a good price for such a model. Could be a bit higher, but I think that this is a good price for it. So if you find one and if you want to buy it, then probably it's good. There are other better solutions available right now, but not in this format. So if you want the widest phone without thinking about high-end models, I still think it has its merits. Good battery life, decent performance, good networking capabilities. So I don't think that you're going to find very many things that are wrong with these models. However, keep in mind that finding covers, screen protectors, is going to be quite difficult, and right now is still a good time to buy them, because you don't know in the future if we will have this ability. And also about spare parts, because as you have already seen, the battery can go bad in such a mobile phone, and you might have to find a replacement. And of course, original replacements are better, but compatible ones may be the only solution down the line. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you like seeing what this phone is capable of. I'm not intending to make very many reviews about phones, but they're going to come from time to time, and I hope you're going to find some interesting models. And please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy watching these videos. Thank you very much.